Hello, my friends, and welcome to the first major balance patch for Slay the Spire 2. So this is very exciting. The game did not launch that long ago, and we're already getting some pretty significant balance changes. So today, I want to talk about the changes that they just made and go over what cards are different now. We'll cover all of the various balance changes and see how that's going to affect your picks going forwards. I'll also talk a little bit about how I feel about some of these balance changes, because I think a lot of them are really good, but there's a couple that I think do need to be revisited. Which of course they're going to do because this is just in beta. So in order to opt into the new beta branch patch, you're going to need to opt into the beta on Steam. Currently, if you just launch the game, it'll play in the old version, but you can try out these balance changes for yourself. As they say here, this is a pretty major balance patch that tones down a lot of the most powerful decks significantly. It's aimed at removing easy access to going infinite from a lot of characters, which I think was a balance issue in the older version of the game because it was just too easy to go infinite on a lot of characters. So I like the aim here. Let's see how they executed it and how that's going to change your card evaluations going forwards. So obviously, they've added a bunch of new art and stuff. They've also added a cool visual for gaining energy, but what we're really here for is the balance changes. So let's jump right in, and we'll start with the Ironclad cards. So I'm going to talk about the old version of the card and the new version of the card. So Ironclad, reworked Dominate. It now is a 1-cost skill that applies 1 or when upgraded 2 vulnerable, and you gain 1 strength for each vulnerable on the enemy, and then it exhausts. Dominate used to be just gain 1 strength for each vulnerable on the enemy and exhaust, and then when upgraded, it would remove the exhaust. This is a really good change. Dominate was basically completely useless in the old version because it was so draw order dependent. You had to already have vulnerable on the enemy in order to be able to cast it for any value at all. So outside of some very specific loops, you would never take this card. Now that it applies vulnerable for itself, it's much more interesting. Not only is applying vulnerable just a good effect, 1 vulnerable and 1 strength for 1 energy is not a terrible trade. And then obviously it can get better if you've stacked more vulnerability, or when you upgrade it, it's 2 vulnerable and 2 strength, and then it exhausts. So I think that you're going to take Dominate a reasonable percentage of the time now. If you compare this to Inflame, that's 2 strength for 1 energy, just as a power. And so Dominate is basically the same thing. But it also applies vulnerable, at least when upgraded. So it's a pretty nice card for Ironclad decks that care about strength, and I expect that you'll see people picking this a lot more frequently. Reworked Expect a Fight card. So it now gains energy for each attack in your hand, and you can't gain additional energy this turn, costing 2 in the base version or 1 in the upgraded version. Expect a Fight used to be just gain 1 energy for each attack in your hand. So they've just added the you can't gain energy this turn clause to Expect a Fight. This, I think, is aimed at removing some possible infinite loops for the Ironclad. I don't think this was a huge problem. Expect a Fight required some pretty specific setup with a lot of card draw to get enough attacks in your hand to make it really energy positive and make you loop it. It's still a good way to get a good burst of energy, but I think that probably this card is just not going to be picked that frequently anymore because you just need to have a lot of card draw in the deck already in order to make this good. If you do have a lot of pummel strikes, then Expect a Fight can still be a pretty valuable way to chain through more of your deck and other draw effects. So there are definitely decks that will use this. I think this card is in a pretty good spot right now, where for decks that want it, it's pretty good, but it's not going to be an auto take, and it doesn't contribute to kind of broken infinites. So I think a good change overall. Spite. Reworked Spite card. Costs 0. Attack, deals 5 damage. If you lost HP this turn, hits 2 times. So Spite used to be a 0-cost card draw effect. Deal 6 damage. If you lost HP this turn, draw 1 card. And now it deals 5 damage, and if you lost HP, deals that damage again. Obviously works with strength, and I think they are trying to make the Ironclad more dependent on strength. This is, I think overall a good direction for the character to give it a little bit more identity. But I think that Spite itself is now just a pretty weak card overall. Deal 5 damage for 0 is okay in the very early game, but later on is going to be just not enough damage to justify its place in your deck. It's kind of hard to trigger the HP loss consistently. If you have the power that costs you 1 HP every turn, then you might want Spite in your deck, but even then, a whole card slot for just a 10 damage card is often not going to be what you want to build your deck around, and in the later game, you're just going to have more powerful things to do. So I think a card that requires setup needs more of a payoff in order to be valuable, and I think you're very rarely going to want to take Spite going forwards. They also reworked Stoke. So Stoke is now a 1-cost rare card with Exhaust your hand, add 1 random card into your hand for each card exhausted, and that card, the random cards that you get will be upgraded if you've upgraded Stoke. It used to be exhaust your hand, draw a card for each card exhausted, and then it would cost 0 when upgraded. So this used to be an incredibly powerful combo card, especially for setting up infinite combos, because not only did it draw you into the main components for whatever your setup was, it would also remove all the bad cards from your deck, so that then you could loop through the good cards. I think this card definitely needed some sort of change because it was way too easy to get infinite combos with Stoke. So I do understand why they wanted to change this card. I don't think that this was the right change because I think it is now almost completely useless. Adding random upgraded cards into your hand, or even random upgraded cards into your hand, usually you're not going to be able to cast most of the cards that you draw. In the later game, they will often be significantly less effective than whatever cards are actually in your deck because you've curated those, they're not random. Anything that adds random cards to your hand is going to junk up your deck for future turns as well. Maybe you can use this if your deck is quite poor to randomly win a boss fight, but you're kind of throwing everything to the winds and hoping for good luck in that case. So I think Stoke is now basically a permanent never take card in the current iteration. I wouldn't recommend picking up a card that just adds random cards to your hand under almost any circumstance, and especially not one that costs you energy, meaning that you can't even play those random cards the turn that you get them. So for some reason in the patch notes here, they've split the balance changes into 2 sections. So rather than go on to the silent balance changes, I'm going to keep looking at the Ironclad changes, just the ones that happened in the next section. So they have also buffed Break. This is the Ancient exclusive card, so you can only get this from the Ancient, and it used to be 2 energy for 20 damage and 5 vulnerable, and now it is only 1 energy, and it is 20 damage at base and 30 damage when upgraded instead of 20-25. So this is good because as an Ancient exclusive card, it felt bad to get such a bad card. Now this is actually a really good attack, so it's pretty nice to have an actual option there. And when you get Break, you're going to be pretty happy about it because 30 damage and a bunch of vulnerable for 1 energy is obviously a pretty powerful card overall. Buffed Cinder. So Cinder was 2 energy for 17 damage and exhausts the top card of your draw pile. It is now 2 energy for 18 damage and upgrading up to 24 instead of 22. You're still never going to take this card. 2 energy for 18 damage is an okay rate. Exhausting the top card of your draw pile is a very real cost because you mostly on the Ironclad don't have control over what's on top of your deck, so you can randomly exhaust important cards, and it in longer fights can make things more difficult. I think you'll still pretty much never take Cinder. It's less energy efficient than most of the Ironclad's other attacking cards, even with the damage increase, and has a real downside instead of an upside. Another changed card in Forgotten Ritual. So this used to be, if you have exhausted a card this turn, gain 3 energy, and then 4 energy when upgraded. It's now the same effect, but it also exhausts when played. This, again, is designed to stop you from doing infinite energy loops, where you draw through a bunch of cards, exhaust one thing, and then Forgotten Ritual is just +2 or +3 energy every single time you draw it. Decks that are doing a lot of exhausting will still play Forgotten Ritual. It will no longer allow you to go infinite easily. So with their goal of removing easy infinites from the game, I think this is a reasonable change. The same decks that previously wanted this card are still going to want it. So overall for the Ironclad, I think these are mostly positive changes. It makes it a little harder to kind of accidentally achieve an infinite loop, and it makes a couple cards, in particular the vulnerable application cards, a little more attractive, so you maybe have a couple more ways to build the character. I think that the Ironclad is going to play very similarly to before this patch, and I do think that the class needs some more significant changes. Right now, it feels like it's kind of struggling for an identity. So I would really like to see them lean more into this vulnerable and strength application, maybe buff the exhaust synergies as well, to give the Ironclad some more directions that you can go with your decks. Because right now you mostly end up, I find, just doing the same energy gain into whirlwind stuff over and over again because it's so easy to win that way. And I think that they need to give the Ironclad a couple more directions it can go in so it can have a stronger class identity. But I do like most of these changes. I think they're very positive, even if they're not, I think, incredibly impactful on how you're going to build and play the character. Next up, the Silent. So even though the Regent got more total changes, I think the changes to the Silent are by far the most significant changes in this patch. It's going to vastly change the way that you play the character overall. Starting with the biggest nerf and largest change in the patch, reworked Prepared into Prepare, which is now a 1-cost common, discard 2 cards, next turn gain 2, or when upgraded 3 energy. So Prepare, of course, used to be a 0-cost, draw a card, discard a card, or when upgraded, draw 2, discard 2. Now, in the old state of the game, Prepared was too good. It was incredibly strong. It was part of the Silent's best deck, which was the cycling and sly deck. It was both a tremendous amount of deck velocity and consistency, and also a huge amount of free energy, because you could play sly cards for free off of Prepared. It was pretty much an auto take every single time that you saw it. So this card definitely did need some adjustment, but I can't say I think this was the right direction to go with it. Making it into, in Slay the Spire 1, there was a card called Concentrate, which was 0 cost, discard 3 cards, gain 3 energy right away, which gave more energy, and was an okay card. It gave more energy. Obviously, there wasn't the Sly synergy to make the discard valuable, but it gave more energy right away and cost less to cast. The current version of Prepare in Slay the Spire 2, I think, is basically unusable. While it is energy positive and could be good if you have an enormous number of Sly cards and no way to discard them, the fact that it no longer draws cards at all means that it is no longer going to be a good Sly enabler for most decks, and delaying your energy to a future turn means that you're likely to take damage on the turn that you cast it. There's certainly some fights where you'll be able to loop it, but it's going to be very draw order dependent, and I think you'll mostly not take this card when you see it. I think that if there's going to be a card with this type of niche effect, it should be at uncommon rather than common, because I think this is now going to kind of junk up your common rewards with cards that only fit into very narrow decks, and only if you have like a lot of Sly cards and no discard already will you want this, by which point your deck is already fairly set and you don't really want to be taking that many common cards anyways. So I think that this was probably an overreaction to how strong the deck was. I definitely do want to see this card changed and the Sly deck nerfed, because I think it was too good and it was too easy to get Ascension 10 wins with it. But removing the main enabler and replacing it with a card that I think is mostly blank, alongside nerfing all the Sly cards, may have been an overreaction. I do expect to see them draw this back a little bit, and in the meantime, we probably won't be taking Prepare that often. The rest of the Silent changes, I think, are less extreme. So firstly, they've nerfed Anticipate, going from gaining you 3 dexterity and then 5 when upgraded to 2 and then 3. Previously, Anticipate was 0 cost, gain 3 dex this turn, and then when upgraded to 5, now it's 0 cost, gain 2, and when upgraded gives you 4. Overall, I think that this was a card I still wasn't taking that frequently. I wouldn't mind having one in my deck often, but often you would still prefer Deflect in this spot for a 0-cost block card. And so I think that Anticipate is still just mostly going to be worse than Deflect. With it giving you only 2 dexterity, you now need to play 2 other blocking cards in the same turn that you play Anticipate for it to break even with Deflect. And that's assuming that you have no other dexterity, which obviously as the Silent is a pretty high priority stat. So usually I think that this card is no longer going to be picked. It can still be good in some spots, but I think that it was already a card that was picked sometimes, but not all the time, and now is going to be picked less of the time. A Corrosive Wave. So Corrosive Wave, the poison gain on it was decreased from 3 and then 4 to 2 and then 3. So Corrosive Wave is whenever you draw a card, all enemies gain that much poison this turn. So applied 3 poison and then 4 when upgraded. I think this was a good change. Corrosive Wave was too powerful. It could easily one-shot a lot of enemies. And the thing about Corrosive Wave is that it's still going to be really good in decks that are drawing a lot of cards. So if you have Acrobatics as a major theme in your deck, which is still a very good card, if you have Adrenaline in your deck, and especially if you have Calculated Gamble, Corrosive Wave is still going to be excellent, even with the decreased poison, but it's less going to be an auto-include in decks that aren't built around card draw, so it gives it a little bit more of a niche application rather than making it an auto-take. I think this is still going to be an extremely strong card and top tier in the Silent's normal way of building, so I like this change overall. Next up, Flick Flack, which also received a slight nerf, going from 7 and then 9 damage to 6 and then 8 damage. So this is a Sly card for 1 energy. Previously, it did 7 damage to all enemies and then 9 when upgraded. Now it does 6 and then 8. This is another change that I think is pretty good. The thing about Flick Flack is that 1 energy for 7 damage to all enemies is already a good card. In Act 1, you're very happy to just hard cast this, and then of course it can cast for free off of Sly, so it has significant benefits, both in the early game, where you can play it with Survivor or any other discard that you've happened to get, and then in the later game it becomes part of the Sly deck, so it's a tempo card that can also give you value in the long game, and that type of card tends to be really strong. So I think, touching the damage, nerfing it down by 1 is a pretty good solution to that. 1 energy for 6 damage to all enemies is a little below rate. It's still an okay card that you're not upset to have to play for the full cost, but it's no longer, I think, just a no-brainer where this card is good in every version. You may want to be more in the Sly deck before Flick Flack is good. They buffed Grand Finale, so it previously was 50 damage and then 60 when upgraded. Now it's 60 and then 75. So Grand Finale can only be played if there's no cards in your draw pile, costs 0 and deals 50 to all enemies, or now 60 to all enemies, and then 75 when upgraded. This card, changing the numbers on this doesn't matter. The play restriction is so punishing that only a very, very few decks can use this anyways. If you were a deck that had removed all but 3 cards from your deck and emptied it out to Grand Finale, you were already taking this card when you saw it anyways, and the numbers on it won't change, so honestly, I think that this card is still going to be mostly useless. Decks that have gotten thin enough to use it are probably some variety of infinite combo deck that don't need it anyways, so overall, I don't think that this change matters. A nerf to Pinpoint. So this card lost 2 damage on the unupgraded version and 3 damage on the upgraded version. Pinpoint is a 3-cost attack that previously did 17 and now does 15 damage, and then more when upgraded, and costs 1 less energy for each skill played this turn. So Pinpoint was just too good at carrying you through the early game, through Act 1. Being able to play Triple Defend and they get a 17 damage card for free, or Double Defend and then a 17 damage card for 1 energy was too good. I think reducing the numbers on this make it still a pretty strong early game tempo card. If you see it in one of your first couple card rewards, you'll still take it. If you don't see it until later in the run, you probably won't take it, which is basically the same position it was in already, just with a little bit less free damage attached. So I like this change overall. Skewer got a damage increase, so this is an X cost card that dealt 7 damage per energy spent on it, and now it deals 8 or 11 when upgraded. So to show you the old version, deal 7 damage X times, now it's deal 8 damage X times. I think this card is still pretty bad. It's just energy inefficient damage, and this type of direct damage isn't really what the Silent is usually trying to do. If you have a lot of ways to generate energy, it can be a way to spend it, but mostly you would just rather have a good 1-cost damage card in the deck, because that's often what you're going to end up doing with Skewer regardless. So usually I still don't see this card being taken frequently. And then finally, Untouchable, another very key card for the Sly deck. Quietly one of the best cards in the Silence card pool, I think. Received a major nerf, going from 9 block to 7, and then only 9 when upgraded. So this was a 2-cost Sly card that gave you 9 block. And now only gives you 7. The big difference here is if you discard it to Sly, it's still very good. So in dedicated Sly decks, this is still going to be pretty good. It's like a better Deflect in that case. But if you have to hard cast it, it's now very energy inefficient. Previously, casting Untouchable was only 1 less block than casting 2 Defends, and with, fewer cards in your deck. So it was a pretty good alternative, and you would be pretty happy to hard cast it, and now you need to actually pay the Sly cost pretty consistently in order to want Untouchable in your deck. This is another change that I don't mind, although I think that nerfing both the Sly payoffs and removing the best enabler may have made the discard deck too weak overall. So we'll see if all of these changes add together to still make that deck viable. I think a lot of the time now with the Silent, what you're going to see given all of these changes is you'll much more frequently end up playing the Silent more similarly to how you would in Slay the Spire 1, with a lot of noxious fumes and then just blocking everything, compared to the more combo-y style that was so powerful in Slay the Spire 2. I think that the Sly stuff will still be pretty good when you get a lot of acrobatics, but since that's the major, or when you get calculated gamble, but since acrobatics is the only common enabler now, that's sort of overall pretty good, I think that you're going to see the Sly cards themselves picked less frequently. So that's going to be the major change to the Silent. I will say that I think this was probably an overreaction to how good the deck was. I would like to see the discard stuff still be a major component of the Silent strategy, because I think just sitting behind block and playing poison cards is not as exciting and has less decision points for the player. So I think that they will probably end up revisiting some of these changes as they go in order to make sure that the Silence playstyle is still dynamic and exciting. Next up, the changes to the Regent. I'll say right up front that I really like the changes to the Regent in this patch. They're mostly based around making the character more consistent and making more different strategies viable, which is exactly what I hoped they would do with a patch to the Regent. So really enjoying the changes so far, and when I've played with them, they've felt really good. First up, Glow. So this card previously was gain a star, draw 2 cards. So you can see here, gain 1 star, draw 2 cards, or gain 2 stars and draw 2 cards when you upgrade it. They've changed it so that it is just draw 1 card immediately, and then 1 again at the beginning of your turn. This is obviously a massive nerf, but this card was very powerful. Glow was pretty much an auto take. I think it was by far the Regent's best card, and I still think it's pretty good. Being able to cycle through your deck and gain stars is not bad, and the extra draw in a future turn can really help the Regent, which is a character that struggles with consistency, cycle through its deck and make sure that it is able to play its best cards pretty regularly. So I think that this Glow change, while obviously a significant nerf, you're still going to take this card a reasonable percentage of the time, especially when upgraded, where it's just a better Venerate. And so I like the change to Glow here overall, when combined with the buffs that cards have gotten in other areas. Then they've changed a bunch of numbers on a number of other cards. So first up, Alignment. This is a 0-cost card that gives you 2 energy. Previously cost 2 stars to cast, now costs 3 stars to cast. That is a real nerf, but for the decks that are using this card that have a lot of star generation and card draw, so decks with glow, for example, alignment is still going to be excellent. So I like this change because you need to build around having the star generation to make it work more. But you can still use this to set up infinite combos with various ways to generate stars, and you can just use it as a way to boost your deck. If you have a lot of star generation and need extra energy in order to play your cards. So I like this change. I think it makes it a little harder to loop into infinite, but without hurting the card too badly. Bundle of Joy was also updated, so this is a now 1 cost, previously 2 cost card that adds 3 random colorless cards into your hand and then exhausts, and at 1 cost or 2 costs, this effect is still terrible. Adding random cards to your hand makes your deck significantly worse. There's no guarantee that they're going to be good. It comes with an upfront cost to just gain access to playing these cards that you might not be able to play. You're still never going to take this card. Next up, a package of 4 cards that I'm going to talk about together because they've basically swapped the effects of 2 cards and then also changed the cards that those cards create. So I'm going to talk about Begone, Charge, Minion Strike, and Minion Dive Bomb all together because Begone now makes strikes instead of dive bombs and Charge now makes dive bombs instead of strikes, and they've also changed those 2 cards. So I'm going to jump into the in-game compendium because it'll just be easier to look at those all at once. So Begone used to be a 4 damage attack that made a minion dive bomb, which previously was a 1 cost 13 damage attack. So it used to be basically 2 cost for 17 damage, which in other words was horrible. Even if it could remove a card from your hand that you didn't want there, that was still not a card you were ever interested in playing. Now it makes a 0 cost 6 damage card that draws a card. So at worst, this effect is just 1 energy for 6 damage and draw a card, which is already very playable. And it can remove statuses, it can remove strikes and defends that you don't want in your deck anymore for the rest of that fight. So in longer elite fights, this is a very solid card, and I think where previously this card was completely unplayable, it's now actually quite solid. Charge, let me hit the uncommon section here. So Charge used to let you turn cards in your deck into minion strikes, which would draw cards, which was great. Turning 2 cards in your deck into 0 cost card draw spells is something that you definitely were interested in. There's a lot of fights where you could turn bad statuses into it. You could always turn strikes or defends that you didn't want into a minion strike, and that was just a great card. Now it turns into 0 cost 13 damage cards, and that's just not worth spending an energy on most of the time. Yes, removing 2 cards from your deck is good, but it takes first drawing the minion dive bomb and then playing it before you actually get the value of thinning your deck. So and there are maybe some fights where you can remove a bunch of status effects with Charge if you draw it in the right turn order, but this is 1 energy that doesn't affect the board at all immediately and takes multiple turns to give you value. So where previously I liked this card a reasonable amount because it gave you card draw, now I think it's very bad. And where previously I did not like Begone very much because it was super expensive for just damage, now I think Begone is actually very, very good. So these cards have kind of reversed in the pick order, and you're going to take Begone pretty frequently, and I think basically almost never take Charge. Collision Course has gotten its damage increased, so it used to be 9 damage at base, now it's 11, and then going up to 15 when you level it. So this is a 0 cost 9 damage card that adds Debris to your hand, which is a blank status effect, no effect, but you can exhaust it for 1 energy. This card now rules. If this was just 1 energy, do 11 damage, that would already be a great card for the early game. That's a very energy efficient damage card. And the fact that you can split up the energy cost or decide not to pay it over multiple turns or decide not to pay it and just accept that you're adding a status to your deck is great. So Collision Course, I expect if you see this early, you're going to take it pretty much every time. Gather Light had the block increased from 7 to 8 and then 11 at the upgraded level. So Gather Light was just gain 7 block, add a star, and now it's gain 8 block, add a star. This was already almost an auto take for the Regent, which struggles with block, and now it's just better, so you're still going to click this card every time you see it. Heirloom Hammer had its damage increased by 3, which is a huge increase to the damage. So this is a 2-cost attack that then lets you copy a colorless card in your hand. Notably, the Sovereign Blade that you can create with the forging cards is colorless, so you can copy that. The problem with this card wasn't the damage, though, and I don't think that a 3 damage increase is going to make it that much more attractive. If you get it really early, then 2 cost for 20 damage is like an okay card that you might just play just for the damage. But later in the game, there's no guarantee that you're going to have a good target to copy. Copying Sovereign Blade is often pretty inefficient because you can't copy it and then play it in the same turn, or you can't play both copies in the same turn unless you have extra energy generation. So while there are some decks that can make use of it, I don't think that the increase to damage is going to significantly change how often you take this card. If you have a lot of good copies, good targets to copy, then you'll still take it, and if you don't, you still won't. I Am Invincible went from 9 block to 10 block, and 12 to 13 at the upgrade point. So this is a 1-cost, now 10 block card, so previously 9, now 10. And then at the end of your turn, if this is on top of your draw pile, play it. The Regent has a lot of ways to manipulate its deck and put cards from hand on top of the draw pile, so this is a good a high rate card at base. 1 cost for 10 block is a card you would just play even if it did nothing else, that you can sometimes play for free. I really wish that it played at the beginning of your turn instead of the end of your turn, though, because I think that would be like a more interesting thing to set up for future turns, even if it would overall be a little less powerful. But that's just like an opinion I have about this card, is I think it would be more fun to play with if that was the case. But overall, this is just a very strong card. Again, this is a character that can struggle to get enough blocks, so buffing one of its block cards to be more efficient makes the character much more consistent and more fun to play, I think. Kingly Kick also got a huge damage increase, going from 24 to 27, and then upgrading from 30 to 35. So this is a 4-cost card that whenever you draw it, you reduce its cost by 1. I still don't think this card is particularly powerful. You need to loop through your deck twice before this is usually going to be worth playing. Obviously, if you have a lot of top-of-the-deck manipulation, so if you have cards that can put, Photon Strike, that can put cards on top of your deck, Photon Cut, excuse me, that can put cards on top of your deck. You can draw it, Photon Cut, draw it again immediately, and then discount it again. But overall, I think that this card is... the reward here is just not that high. If you draw it 3 times, you get a really efficient attack. But before you've drawn it 3 times, it's still just not that good. So usually I think you're not going to add this to your deck, even if they've added additional damage to it. Kingly Punch is very similar. So they have added the base damage has increased when it upgrades, and the scaling damage each time that you draw it also scales more. So it's 8 damage at base, or 10 when upgraded, and then it has increased from 3 damage every time you draw it to 4 damage every time you draw it, or 6 when upgraded. Now, this is actually a really strong card now, because at base, this is a 1-cost 12 damage attack, because in order to play it the first time, you'll have to have drawn it at least once. And as you cycle through your deck, it gets better. So if you get this card early, it's always going to be played. 1 cost for 12 damage is, again, very energy efficient. And then if you have a deck that cycles through frequently, then this card can easily stack up to like a 1-cost 24 damage attack pretty quickly. And unlike Kingly Kick, the failure mode isn't there, because you can always just play this as a solid attack, even if you only draw it once in a fight, unlike Kingly Kick. So Kingly Punch is excellent, and I think you're going to take it pretty frequently. Next up, Parry. So this is a power that works with the Sovereign Blade, and basically, whenever you play the Sovereign Blade, it gives you an amount of block. Previously, that was 6 block every time you played the Sovereign Blade. Now it is 8 block, upgrading to 11 instead of upgrading to 9. That's a pretty significant upgrade. I still think that this card is not going to be amazing because you pay 1 energy for it. It doesn't do anything right away. On a turn where you play this and Sovereign Blade, you're getting 8 block and the Sovereign Blade, which is okay. And on a turn where you play this and don't play Sovereign Blade, you're getting no immediate value, though it can lead to some better turns later on. Like, for example, if you were to play the newly buffed Gather Light plus Sovereign Blade, that's now 16 block on a turn where you play Sovereign Blade. So I think if you're replaying Sovereign Blade a lot, parry is now a little bit more attractive, though still probably a low priority. Patter also has had the block increased, so this is just a 1 cost 8 block card, now 9 block, and it gives you 2 vigor, making your next attack do 2 more damage. So basically this is 9 block and 2 damage for 1 energy. That's with the actual patter entry, that's a totally reasonable card. 9 block and 2 damage is 11 stats for 1 energy. Obviously you have to combine it with another attack, but you can get more value from it if you have a multi-attack spell of some kind. So again, I think you're going to take this reasonable amount of the time in the early game. Gather Light is usually going to be preferred, but I think Patter is a totally reasonable card, again, for a character that can struggle to get enough block. Solar Strike got the damage increase, so this is just deal damage and gain a star, or 2 stars when upgraded. It was before 8 damage, which was under rate for 1 energy. Now it's 9 damage, so it's just a classic strike plus, as in you play a card that's just a better strike and also get a little bit of a rider effect on top of it. 9 damage for 1 energy, gain a star, totally reasonable. You'll get it in the early game, you won't take it if you see it later. Spoils of Battle now forges for 2 more, so previously this was Forge 10, now it's Forge 12. This was just the very basic Forge card, so it just makes the Sovereign Blade or increases its damage if it's already created. I think this is still pretty much the worst way to forge the Sovereign Blade. It has no other effect in addition to that. If you play it and then play the Sovereign Blade in the same turn, you're spending 3 energy on 20 damage or 22 damage now, which is obviously way under rate. And it will often do nothing if you don't have Sovereign Blade in your hand at the time. So I usually still don't want this card in my deck, I think, even with the increased numbers on it. There are better ways to forge. Though, if you do end up with a Spoils of Battle, at least it works a little bit better now, and as part of a dedicated Sovereign Blade strategy is more attractive. Void Form ate a fairly needed nerf, I think. It was made ethereal, so Void Form was end your turn, the first 2 cards you play each turn are free to play. Making it ethereal is very similar to Echo Form, and I think that these cards, generally speaking, should have ethereal. I think that's part of the fun balancing around these very powerful 3-cost powers. Making the first 2 cards you play each turn free is excellent, especially for the Sovereign, because it makes cards with star costs free as well and not take stars. So this card is still excellent. Even you probably won't bother upgrading it because you're just going to play it every time you draw it most of the time. But Void Form's still going to be super, super powerful. Wrought in War, this is the other kind of basic forging card, and it's gone from 7 damage Forge 5, which it previously was, to 7 damage Forge 7. This is much more exciting now, because now if you play it and play Sovereign Blade in the same turn, you get 24 damage for 3 energy. Still under rate, but not as under rate as if you were to play Spoils of Battle. And it's also much less embarrassing to play this card on a turn where you don't have Sovereign Blade in hand, because at least you get 7 damage out of it, which is not as good as you would want for most just direct damage cards, but still okay. So I think usually if you're planning to build around forging, Wrought in War is going to be the way that you're going to go, rather than Spoils of Battle. Though you can obviously play Spoils of Battle if you're going for a really all-in forging strategy. But this is a nice buff, and it makes the Sovereign Blade a little bit more attractive because it comes attached to a slightly better package of a card. Overall, I think that the changes to Regent are very good. Usually, you're going to be able to block a lot more damage now, which is going to make the deck a little bit more fun. You probably are not as all in on comboing things out on the first turn as you were before. You can play a slightly slower, more value-oriented style where you do some forging or do some card drawing or do some card removal with Begone. The runs that I've played with Regent since the changes have been, in my opinion, honestly a lot more fun. I think there are still some more changes needed in order to make the Sovereign Blade strategy a little bit more powerful, but these are definitely moving the class in the right direction, so big fan of this patch for the Regent. The Necrobinder. So the Necrobinder's changes are all focused on removing easy infinities, which again I think is something that was needed for this character. Mostly in high-level Necrobinder play, I was just going for the same infinite loop deck every single time, so that deck definitely needed a nerf. Firstly, they've nerfed Banshee's Cry. So this card was 33 damage to all enemies for 6, and costs 2 less for each ethereal card played this combat. Now it costs 9, and it no longer gets additional damage when you upgrade it, and the upgraded version costs 7. So even the upgraded version is still significantly worse than the old unupgraded version, because it's 7 for 33 instead of 6 for 39, meaning you have to play 4 ethereal cards before it's free, instead of 3. The Banshee's Cry is not a card that I've had a chance to play with significantly, so I'm going to say that my opinion here is based mostly on theorycraft and not on practice, but I do think that this was probably too easy to get to the point where it's free. Playing 3 ethereal cards in a fight is not that big a number, especially because the Necrobinder has a lot of easy ways to generate ethereal cards, so I understand why they nerfed this card for sure. I think it will still be good if you have ways to generate ethereal cards. Borrowed Time. So this is another one of the extremely impactful changes in this patch, certainly the most impactful for Necrobinder. Borrowed Time previously was 0 cost, gain 1 energy or 2 when upgraded, and increase your own doom by 3. Now, it increases your doom by 6, and only ever gives you 1 energy. So previously, it was 3 doom to yourself, gain 1, or gain 2 when upgraded. And now it is 6 doom to yourself, gain 1, or 3 doom, gain 1 when upgraded. So the upgraded version is now the old unupgraded version, and the unupgraded version is really bad. Overall, this card is now just really bad. The fact that it is 1 card for 1 energy, those cards are generally pretty weak in Slay the Spire. There are some decks that can make use of it, and you can still find ways to go infinite with this card, though obviously it's a lot more difficult. I don't like that they both increased the doom cost and made it not give extra energy, because I think that now this card is basically unplayable when unupgraded, and when upgraded is still bad, and so I think you're very rarely going to pick it. It's now just Wisp, but mostly worse, and decks that want this effect will probably take Wisp instead, which is already a pretty weak card. So I don't think we need both this and Wisp in the Necrobinder pool, and they probably need to adjust one of these cards further in order to give each of them a different niche, and also make both of them not just bad. Capture Spirit had the numbers reduced significantly, so this card used to be enemy loses 3 HP, add 3 souls to your draw pile. Now it is enemy loses 2 HP, add 2 souls to your draw pile. So previously 3 health, 3 souls, now 2 health, 2 souls, upgrading back into the old unupgraded version when you upgrade it. This card was way too strong, so I definitely think they needed to change it. And honestly, this change feels pretty good to me. You will still definitely play this card just for 2 souls in your draw pile, because that's just a very good effect regardless. And now you're more incentivized to upgrade it as well, because previously it was so strong unupgraded, you didn't need to upgrade it. And now you are much more incentivized to want to spend an upgrade on Capture Spirit. I think this was a good change overall to a card that was too powerful. Also, an important note for these 2 cards. Previously, this was a 2-card infinite combo. If these were the last 2 cards in your deck, and you had a soul in hand, you could set up Borrowed Time to constantly replay Capture Spirit and use the souls from Capture Spirit to constantly redraw Capture Spirit and Borrowed Time. That's still true if you've upgraded Capture Spirit. So the generating 3 souls plus being able to generate 1 energy with borrowed time. This is still an infinite combo between these 2 cards. It kills the enemy because they lose HP every time you cycle Capture Spirit, so you don't worry about stacking up Infinite Doom because you're not ending your turn, you're just killing them. So that hasn't changed, and I do think that they probably should have changed these cards in a way that got rid of that very easy infinite combo to set up. Danse Macabre. So this is a power that gave you previously 3 block whenever you cost a card that costs 2 or more energy, upgrading to 4. Now it gives you 4 block, upgrading to 6. So they've increased the numbers on this. This card is still very bad. The amount of expensive cards that you play in a given fight is usually going to be pretty low. If you are looping through enough expensive cards that you would want this effect, the enemies are probably dead because you've done some kind of infinite energy thing. So you still are just never going to pick this card. Debilitate. So Debilitate has had its damage increased by enormously by 3 for a 1 energy card, which is huge. So it's kind of gotten the Strike Plus treatment where it's now 1 cost, 10 damage, which is just a totally reasonable card to take early in Act 1, even if it had no rider effect. And it still gives vulnerable and weak or twice as effective against the enemy for the next 3 turns. I think this card is now really good. If you see it early, you'll almost always take it because the effect is very strong. Doubling weakness against an enemy will mean that they will do basically no damage to you. And 1 cost for 10 damage is a totally reasonable card. So you can take this very easily even before you have any way to apply these effects, and you'll be pretty happy to have it in your deck. And then later on, if you do get easy ways to apply weakness in particular, but also vulnerable, then Debilitate is just going to still be a totally reasonable endgame play and will end up being a really strong defensive card. 3 turns of this debuff is great. So making this card have basically no downsides to put in your deck because it's damage efficient even without the downside, I think you're going to take this card all the time. That said, they did change one of the easy ways to apply weakness on the Necrobinder when they nerfed Defy. So Defy previously was 6 block for 1 weakness, and upgrading to 7 block, 6 block and apply 1 weakness, and upgrading to 7 block and apply 2 weakness. It was ethereal, but that didn't matter because it's such a strong card that you'll play it every time you draw it anyways. The change is that now it, when upgraded, gives you 9 block, but still only 1 turn of weakness. This makes it a much more interesting decision whether to play it, because even if the enemy wasn't attacking previously, you could always play the upgraded Defy for multiple turns of weakness and avoid getting it etherealized. And it was just one of the best and most efficient defensive cards in the entire game. 2 turns of weakness and 7 block for 1 energy is crazy. So it definitely needed a nerf. This was already an auto pick, and I think this puts it in a much more interesting spot where sometimes you will let it etherealize instead of just getting 2 turns of weakness. But when an enemy is going to attack, 9, if you've upgraded it, 9 block and 1 weakness is a great blocking card, and 6 block and 1 weakness is still a totally reasonable blocking card. So you'll still take Defy pretty frequently. It's no longer a card that you'll click every single time that you see it, but it's good in any deck that needs more defensive capabilities, I think, even with this pretty significant nerf. Dirge now exhausts. It has otherwise the same effect. So Dirge is an X cost spell that summons 3 and adds a soul to your draw pile for each energy spent on it, upgrading to summon 4 and add souls plus to your draw pile. I was honestly really surprised when I realized Dirge didn't exhaust the first time, because similar effects almost always exhaust in Slay the Spire. So this is kind of a pretty natural change, and I think that this card is still really good. You can no longer loop through it many times, but it's always just going to be a relevant effect. Summon even if you only spend 1 on it, summon 3, put a soul in your deck. Totally reasonable card, and you can use extra spare energy on any turn where you draw it in order to get a big effect. You can also combine it with energy generation for a big summon and a bunch of souls. So I think you'll still take Dirge quite frequently. Grave Warden. So Grave Warden was 1 cost for 8 block and put a soul in your deck, and upgraded to be 10 block and put a soul plus, so a 0 cost draw 3 into your deck. Grave Warden was one of the Necrobinder's best cards, so it's not surprising that they nerfed it a little bit. They have changed it, so the base card is exactly the same, 8 block, put a soul in your deck. But the upgrade is now you get 11 instead of 10 block, and you get a unupgraded soul still. This is going to make it slightly harder to find infinites, because previously being able to draw 3 off the upgraded Grave Warden soul was part of a bunch of infinite combos. But Grave Warden was one of Necrobinder's best cards, and still is, even without that capability. I'm always going to be happy to have at least 2 of these in a Necrobinder deck, and I'm still going to take it most times I see it. Sculpting Strike got the damage increased by 1, so this is now 9, was 8 damage, now is 9 damage for 1 energy. Add Ethereal to a card in your hand. There's a lot less cost for speculating on this if you're going for some sort of Ethereal synergy deck, because 1 cost for 9 damage is kind of the base rate for an okay card in terms of attacks. I still don't think I'm going to take this card that frequently, because overall I haven't been super impressed with it, and there are times when it's awkward to play, but you can definitely take this as an early tempo card and maybe go for some ethereal stuff later on. And of course, you can also arrange it so it removes bad cards from your hand, and it's going to do that more often than it's going to be awkward to play. But it still, I think, is just not going to be a very exciting card. And finally, a major nerf to Seance, a card that definitely needed it. Previously, this was a 0-cost ethereal card that transformed a card in your draw pile into soul, which basically every cycle made your deck massively better, and also made you better at cycling through the deck, because it turned your worst card into your best card that then turned into no cards, so you drew into your best cards more often. Now it costs 1 to play in the unupgraded version, and the upgraded version no longer makes an upgraded soul. That means that the upgrade on Seance is mandatory, but you're still, I think, going to take this card most times that you see it. Anytime you see it upgraded, it's excellent. And if you take it early, you can almost always upgrade it. It's still going to make your deck significantly better. I think this was probably a welcome change. It makes, again, sculpting your deck into the perfect deck a little bit harder. And one thing that I like about how they've changed the Necrobinder is you have to be a little more choosy with what you upgrade, because there's a few more cards that actually want to be upgraded now. Previously, the Necrobinder could get away with not upgrading most of its most important cards, and so if you watch like any of my Necrobinder runs, I'm often just upgrading random nonsense by the end of the run, because there's nothing that really needs it. Now, with a few more cards that want you to spend upgrades on it, there's a few more decisions that you have to make in deck building. I think overall the Necrobinder changes are quite positive. I do like that it's no longer a one-note going infinite deck. I think that they will probably need to still buff some of the Asti attacks in order to make Asti a viable fighter, because I think still you're just going to be going for soul loops and Doom with the Necrobinder, because they didn't change anything in the other decks available to this class. They've just made it a little harder to go infinite. So I do think that there's a lot more work to be done here in order to make the other archetypes more viable, but I do think this is overall a step in the right direction, toning down some of the most abusive decks. And then finally the Defect, which got very few changes. So the Defect only had 2 cards touched. I think this probably means that they're planning more significant reworks, especially to a couple of the archetypes that are less supported for the Defect. Now, I will say that I'm not at all an expert in the Defect. If you've watched my recent video, I mentioned that this is the class that I'm least comfortable with, so take my opinions here with a grain of salt. The Defect, they've only changed Hotfix, which was a 0-cost gain 2 focus card. And it now has Exhaust, so 0-cost, gain 2 focus, and Exhaust. And then the upgrade will remove Exhaust, making it the old unupgraded version, instead of increasing the focus up to 3. Focus is a super strong stat on the Defect. Increasing your focus by 2 could be like 6 block for 0 energy, for example. And Hotfix, I think, was a card that performed extremely well overall. So this is going to make the focus stuff a little less consistent for the Defect. I do think that the Defect is a class that generally struggles with consistency. So you're going to want to upgrade and needs a lot of upgrades. So this makes its upgrades a little bit more hungry, because Hotfix, you now really, really want to upgrade this if you're doing a lot of orb stuff. But overall, I think that this card was too strong and definitely needed a nerf. Rocket Punch was also buffed. So the cost reduction on Rocket Punch, which was whenever a status card is created, reduce this card's cost to 0 energy this turn. Rocket Punch costs 2, but you can deals 13 and draws a card. All of that's the same. But now, when a status card is created, the cost reduction effect lasts until it's played instead of just the end of the turn, which gives you a lot of extra viability with Rocket Punch. And this archetype, I think, needed some support, the status creation archetype for the Defect, because it's pretty hard to get into. You need both ways to create statuses and payoffs, and a lot of the ways to create statuses are not powerful enough in a vacuum to make them pickable, because they make your deck worse. And the payoffs, obviously, you don't want until you have those cards. But Rocket Punch is an okay card at its base rate and is now an on-ramp into this archetype, because 2 energy for 13 damage and draw a card. It's not great, but it's playable in some cases even without the discount. And buffing the discounted version means that you're much more likely to take this card before you have a lot of ways to generate statuses and still get value out of it. And so I think it's going to be a little easier to find your way into that archetype, which is definitely something that I think they're interested in doing, since the orb stuff was, I think, generally seen as way more powerful than the status stuff. And this will probably still need a couple more adjustments before that becomes a major strategy for the Defect. Overall, obviously minor changes for the Defect, and I think we'll probably see much more significant changes in future. They've also made a bunch of changes to colorless cards, and obviously these are going to affect all characters because they all have access to the colorless card pool. Some of these are pretty impactful. The first one is Hidden Gem. So Hidden Gem is just, it adds Replay 2 to a random card in your draw pile, and they've added the clause, a random card without replay. Previously, you could stack Replay infinitely on the same card with Hidden Gem, and so if you had achieved like an infinite loop, you could stack Replay on a card like not Hand of Greed specifically, but a card that gives you gold, or the Necrobinder card that removes a card from your deck at the end of combat, and then you could get your whole deck down to 1 card, things like that. Anything that gave you permanent value. So this is basically just some future proofing to prevent abusive interactions and prevent players from doing stalling things with infinite loops that could create like infinite gold or whatever. Probably a good change overall, but mostly a technical change to stop dumb things from happening. Seeker Strike. So Seeker Strike used to be 6 damage, and then choose 1 of 3 cards in your draw pile to add into your hand, which was not great because the rate for damage to energy was pretty poor on this card. You usually don't want to add just a strike to your deck. But now it does 9 damage or 12 when upgraded. So now this is actually a pretty good card. It's another Strike Plus. This is now a pretty good roll if you get it from the Niao buff that adds colorless cards to your deck. Previously, you probably wouldn't take this because it was just really bad. Now it's totally reasonable to pick off of that and can be a good card in the early game. So this has turned a mostly unplayable card into a playable card. Good change. Another minor technical change for Discovery. Basically, this would let you choose 1 of 3 random cards to add to your hand, and then it would cost 0 to play this turn. So one cost for 1 of 3 random cards. Now it's free to play, meaning if it has a star cost or presumably in the future other alternate costs, those costs are all also reduced to 0. Just a minor technical change to make this card work the way you would expect. I still think the card is not great. Eternal Armor as a power has had a pretty huge buff given to it. Previously, this gave you 7 plating for 3 energy, so 7 block the turn you play it, and then 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now it gives you 9 plating the turn you play it, and then obviously decreases. This will stack with other sources of plating as well, so 3 energy for 9 block that turn. You're still usually not going to be able to block all of the incoming damage, but if you can play it on a setup turn or a turn where the enemy isn't attacking, Eternal Armor can be playable. There are some decks, I think, that will use this occasionally, though I think it's still usually going to be a relatively rare pick, even with the buff. Hidden Gem, which we already talked about, can no longer be generated in combat. This, again, a technical change to provide behavior like you would expect. And Production, the other major colorless card change, is a 0-cost card that gives you 2 energy, used to Exhaust, so 0 cost, 2 energy, and Exhaust. And previously it upgraded to remove the Exhaust. Now it gives you 3 energy instead. This is just to prevent easy infinite loops, similar to the change to the Necrobinder card that generates energy. This, I think, is an overall good change just to prevent easy infinite loops when you get this card. Decks that still want this effect are still going to take this card. You probably still won't upgrade it most of the time, but overall, if you want a 0-cost gain 2 energy card, Production is still going to be good for decks with like a lot of card draw, for example. But just cutting off easy infinite loops. And in addition to all of the card changes, they've also done a bunch of changes to enemies and various effects in the game. So I'm going to quickly talk about all of these balance changes as well. Firstly, some changes to enemies. They've reworked the Doormaker boss. They don't go into the difference here, but the difference for the Doormaker is it's now invincible on the first turn, which gives you a turn to set up, but also means you can't like one turn kill it as easily. And then it has a new mechanic where every 10 cards you draw, it eats the 10th card and gains extra strength. So it punishes you for looping through your deck a lot. I've played through a couple fights against it and haven't found it significantly different. Decks that will loop through effects will still be able to one turn kill it most of the time, even though it's eating your cards. But it is a cooler enemy, and honestly, it just felt like a big sack of hit points before, so this gives it a little bit more of an identity, and I like that. The Skulking Colony, so that's the boss that can't take more than 20 damage in a turn, has a deadlier moveset. This was, I think, one of the easier elites in general, and basically just gets more damage at the cost of a slightly decreased health pool. And so this is going to be a more dangerous elite and no longer as much of a free roll. I think overall a good change for the enemies in general. They've added 2 new Niao blessings. So the first of them is choose one of 3 rare cards and add an injury. Injury just being an unremovable, unplayable status effect, or a removable, unplayable status effect. This is very similar to one of the Niao buffs in Slay the Spire 1, which is just like gain a curse, gain a rare card. And obviously has some risks, but I think is okay. It's usually, I think, going to be in the bottom 50% of cards that I'll pick, though there are some classes that benefit more from rare cards than others. And so maybe on, for example, the Regent, which has really strong rare cards overall, you might take this more often. And then also upgrade one of your strikes and one of your defends. This is a very consistent upgrade. If you have a difficult early path, this one's pretty good. Just getting 2 card upgrades right away makes your deck significantly stronger at the beginning. You'll take less chip damage. You might be able to take one earlier elite fight. This one's fine. On top of all of those changes, there are some general balance changes overall. Firstly, all relics in the shop now cost 25 gold less. This is massive and means that you're much more likely to actually buy relics in the shop. I think this is a great change because I found that I very rarely had the money to buy a relic and a card removal, or I would often be choosing between adding like 3 great cards to my deck or 1 relic, and the relics would almost always lose out. So I think this is going to make it a much more interesting decision in the shop, and you're going to see some of the cool relics more frequently. Relics that generate gold no longer appear at the merchant. Obviously, you wouldn't buy these typically because they would just set you back a bunch of gold, and it would take forever to catch back up, so great change there. Another change, and I'm not personally a huge fan of this one, is that the Gloom Ascension, which is the Ascension 6 penalty, which makes rest areas appear less frequently. also now affects event rooms. So you're going to see fewer event rooms and fewer rests at higher ascension levels. Basically, you're going to have more hallway fights. I don't love this change because I think that in Slay the Spire 2, hallway fights are right now fairly poorly balanced. You almost always want to avoid them as much as possible. And so this is kind of a way of making the player take more hallway fights. I would rather see them adjust the rewards or the balance on these fights so that you actually wanted to take them rather than just kind of forcing you to take them by making more show up. And this also has the knock-on effect of making runs just take longer. And nobody really enjoys doing the really late hallway fights. By the time your deck has come together, it's often just kind of a chore to get through the really late hallway fights, and they're just there to kind of tax your HP. So I don't love this change. I'm pretty sure this is a preliminary change, and they're going to do a balancing pass on a lot of these fights to make them more attractive to take later on. Hopefully this doesn't stick, or if it does, we get more exciting hallway fights that make it more fun. A couple other changes here. Power levels can no longer stack above 1 billion. Obviously, that doesn't matter most of the time, but good for obviously technical reasons. And then you can't get unlocks in daily or custom runs, and you can't get stats in daily or custom runs. Of course, for the really hard or really easy versions of those runs, you don't want that affecting your overall stats. So some good changes there. They've also then changed a bunch of potions and relics. So the Amethyst Aubergine, which previously gave 10 gold per enemy, now gives 15. If you get this early, this relic is now really strong. So one that I would be very happy to pick up. You don't really get a decision as to whether you can pick it up or not now, because it no longer shows up in shops, so you can't buy it. But if you do see it, you're going to get a lot of extra gold for the run. And this is maybe a reason to take more hallway fights. The Book of 5 Rings is whenever you add 5 cards to your deck, you heal for 15 or now 20. I don't think that changes much. It's nice if you are, if you have it and you're growing your deck, you'll maybe trigger this once or twice during a run. So this will give it a little bit more of an effect. The bowler hat increases extra gold gain from 20% to 25%. Very similar, just making it a little bit more impactful. Permafrost, this is when you play your first power in a turn. In a fight, you previously gained 6 block, now you gain 7 block. I already thought this was a pretty good relic, though I tend to play pretty power-heavy decks. Just getting 6 block on your first turn, more or less for free, was already fine. It's worse than Anchor, but I think that Permafrost is still fine. Planisphere, let me remember what this one does. Oh, right, of course. So this is whenever you enter an event room, a question mark room, you heal for this amount, so the amount has been increased. I already thought this relic was pretty decent. You already wanted to path towards as many question mark rooms as possible, and this gives you yet more incentive to. You'll probably trigger it like 4 times per act, so I think that the Planisphere is now just a pretty solid relic overall. Stonecracker, so this was previously during boss combats, you would upgrade 3 random cards in your draw pile. Now it only upgrades 2 cards, but it works during every combat. And I think this is actually just a great relic. Upgrading cards is deceptively powerful because not only does it buff those cards themselves, it makes the average strength of your deck better, it makes the average draw better, so upgrading cards that you don't currently have upgraded, even temporarily, is really nice. And even though this hits random cards, it might hit a strike or a defend, it might hit something good, and even upgrading a strike or a defend turns what was previously a mostly blank card into a relevant card for a lot of the game, and so I think that this relic is again quite strong. They've also changed a lot of the enemies. Mostly these changes, I think, I'm not going to go over every single enemy change individually, but they have kind of adjusted them more towards the median by making the most powerful enemies a little weaker and the weaker enemies a little more powerful. So for example, the statue, which was kind of a difficult DPS check for a lot of characters, the Bygone Effigy, has had its damage reduced, so it won't just absolutely slam you if it gets one attack through, whereas the Berdanis has had its damage increased. I already thought the Berdanis was pretty tough because it attacks every turn, so I don't know that it needed this buff, But generally, they've brought the elites more in line with each other, and also increased the difficulty of some of the hallway fights. I will say one that really I'm pleased by is that they've nerfed Living Fog. I think that this was wildly too difficult as an encounter. I still think it's probably way too difficult and just needs the Living Fog health itself reduced by like 20. But overall, I think they're making some good balance changes. I think that the enemy changes there's a combination of buffs and nerfs, which mostly will wash out. So combined with the general reduction in strength of the class's cards, you're going to see a slight increase in difficulty after this patch, because they've reduced the power of the cards that you have. And while the enemies have been adjusted, they haven't been significantly reduced to match. So I think the game has gotten a little bit harder after this patch, which at least at high Ascension levels, which I don't mind personally. But I think that is one of the effects of the patches. In addition to all of these balance changes, of course, there are a host of technical and linguistic and artistic changes. I'm obviously not going to cover all of those because we're here to talk about balance, but it's great to see that the game is getting all of these updates to art and story and design and direction, and that they're adding more non-placeholder art and everything. Of course, I wish them great success with the development, because I've really been enjoying the game. I think that overall, with this patch, I definitely do want to see a couple of these cards adjusted. I don't think it did enough, in my opinion, to push some of the less played archetypes to be more played, with the exception of the Regent, who I think this is a pretty good set of changes for. So I do think there's still a little bit more progress to be made, but it definitely was good that they cleaned up some of the most abusive decks available that were available just too easily. So I think definitely a step in the right direction. All right, my friends, I hope that you enjoyed this look at the Slay the Spire 2 most recent patch. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Let me know if you think that any of these changes affect the game in a way that I didn't notice, or if you disagree with some of my evaluations of whether a card has gotten much worse or much better now. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to my channel for more Slay the Spire 2 and other strategy game analysis, and I'll catch you next time.